Let me formally welcome you to the Fifth Direction space, Andreas. It's wonderful to have you here and to have a conversation. I was trying to think of um, words to kind of describe you, my friend, and lots of words came up. And so, if I can just kind of name a few, I came up with writer, storyteller, mythologist, ritualist, linguist, musician, teacher, translator, mentor, and then there's probably a whole lot of words in languages that I don't understand as well, which we might get into. But I might start by asking you, where are you right now, kind of, geographically, so we can locate you, and then also
I'm
oh, go on.
yeah. Yeah, I'm in south of England. That's where I am at the moment.
And
Brighton. Brighton.
is in Brighton? Oh wow, Brighton's a
Yeah.
great place. And what kind of landed you there? Because I know you're like Swedish, but you've grown up in many countries.
Oh wow. So first there was the Big Bang, and no, it's
Yeah.
a long story. I mean, I was, I've been moving back and forth between England and France and Switzerland and places for. It's one of those things. I return for somehow my wife and I we've ended up returning to England. And we have this cyclical moves where we leave, we go somewhere else, and then we come back. So now I'm back, and I've got my daughters now here and everything. So this is where I'm based for the moment. But you never know what will happen in the next few years.
Right. So
I
you,
might be off somewhere again.
yeah,
So I'm constantly. I've always lived a life slightly uprooted,
that's how you
actually.
like it, I guess. A bit transient, a
I'm
bit
not
of a
sure it's
rambler.
how I like it. It's the way that my diamonds or the way the spirits have chosen for me. So I've always been slightly one foot out the door. Mm.
Mm, mm. Is your wife English, Swedish?
English, yeah, half
Okay.
English, half Swiss.
Oh, okay.
So it gets, yeah. So we've got lots of passports.
Yeah, but you spent quite a lot of time in Switzerland, right? Am I right in saying
I
that?
did, and in South America, yes.
Mm.
So the beginning, I grew up in South America when I was very young, during Pinochet's regime in Chile, and that was lots of. I've got memories from that, and then and then I went and lived in Switzerland and Sweden. But Sweden, I lived in my forming years. The first love. The 16, 17 initiations. That was in Sweden, so that's very important. So that's always been my a sense of homeland for me.
Mm. Okay. And now we're talking about those kind of childhood images. There's one thing that I've been really dying to ask you, and that is when did you first open up to kind of mythology and all the things that you're doing now? Is that something that came later, or was there kind of a spark in childhood that you followed?
I think, yeah, I, I have this belief, in a sense, that mythic belief that the birds or the animals know us from the deep wells of memory. It's like as you're born into this shape, I always find there is some kind of root, some kind of purpose, something that you're called for, and. I've always felt that the imagination or visionary capacity and that obviously goes hand in hand with the mythic. So that's always been part of my life. It's only later when you start meeting other people that you realize, oh, this is where my spiritual home is. So this is where I'm sort of à l'aise. I'm happy to dwell in. So I've always kind of known that throughout my life, but. Okay, so the way in which more or less got brought into the mythic poetic world, like we talk with Danny or Martin or Robert Bly and all these guys, that was through my education. I run a charity and I did a lot of education work in schools. And what happened was that I had to tell stories about trees. I had to tell, often the scientific stories, how trees work, why they matter, how they live, and all those things. And suddenly the mythic side to the trees in the storytelling started to seep in. So suddenly the trees the original ancestors of humanity, which is is the first thing you read in the Poetic Edda. And when people, even children, when they heard things like that, they were like, oh, they stopped to listen in the assembly. And I thought, really, that's interesting. They don't really hear much about the chlorophyll and all the rest of it. You know, they understood, you know, but suddenly when it was like, yeah, so the first man was born out of the ash tree, and the first woman out of the elm tree, and suddenly there was like a silence. And it was through that many years ago that then I started telling mythic or fairy tales and stories in the schools, and that's how I entered into the world of storytelling. And then obviously that took me, always like Zephyr's winds, you know, it was, after that, I was on the magical carpet.
Yeah, and do you feel that you had the same experience yourself as a child, that you were kind of able to open up into story like that? I guess we all do in some sense, but do you have
I
a kind
think
of
our visionary capacities as children is when we are half mythic.
mm,
I think it's what comes later in life when you have to enter the world of logos, the world of the peer-reviewed essay, and you have to formulate things, and the idea of becoming a magician or working in that field, it's never open to you. It's never something that your career advisor will start talking to you about. You know, so it's always been a little bit of a hidden or working on the edges. But one thing that I feel that it never really gets credit for, but there was this happened in the 80s. There was this, as you know, this role-playing games, and role-playing games were, they were demonized in the 80s. I don't know if you remember that. But there's one extraordinary thing, what I felt with role-playing games, things like Dungeons and Dragons and all of that, is that they open up the visionary muscle in a playful setting. And I remember when I met that game, I recognized there was something really therapeutic and important about it. And that's also the idea of theater, which is very similar, actually. It's a form of role playing, and those two things were always very part of my early life for all the good reasons. So I would always encourage, even till this day, younger people to have it's not about video games, it's not about that. It's about creating play in which you are actively engaging the visionary muscle, the idea of internalizing images, and theater and active play and all of those things were always part of my early days. Mm.
Yeah, that's amazing. I've just written a little piece on this actually. So this is kind of
Oh,
right where I've been thinking lately, and and
yeah,
and
yeah,
I
yeah.
couldn't agree more with what you've just said. And I think that one of the I guess issues with modern culture is that we try to we understand that play is important for kids, but I think that we try to put too much structure into the playing, and sort of take away that imaginative side of it by having too many rules and this and that and the other, which actually tends to shut down the imagination. There's some lovely work which has been done on the forms of play.
Yeah.
I think it was written Roger Calwa a while ago. He described these four forms of play, and one of those forms is exactly what you just outlined, and which he felt was by far the most important. And he felt that was the one that is tending to kind of become too structured and rigid, and therefore losing what it is about it, which makes it so important. And he felt
Exactly.
that was actually the start of moving into this surface level logos culture in which we find ourselves. So you probably agree with that.
Absolutely. And I
Mm,
think it's also looking at the natural world when you see lion cubs or wolf cubs or any play in their raising of the cubs has to do with a playful attitude to life, playing with, whether it's playing with the bones or the stones, etc. And that, in a sense, for us as children, it is the time when we can step into the imagination. And I think here we're entering into a very important part of the mythopoetic and the work that we're doing, is that the imaginal can be regarded as the very ground of reality.
Mm,
And there is the idea that nothing in our rooms here, that where we are sitting, or the computers we're using, or anything we're doing, or nothing has not been born out of the imaginal. It's all been born out of ideas, in the field of ideas. So that's the field of play. That's the field of intuition. That's the field of feelings, and that's, so I sense that very much, that it's an integral part of my work now, is to engage deeper in the imaginal, work more with it, using active imagination, using journeying, and all of these things have become really important, even in storytelling as well,
mm,
using that idea in storytelling,
mm.
which is not to fix the stories, not to put them in, not to have them only on the page, but allow them to come out of the page and into the telling by the fire, by the sea, or amongst friends, and see what shapes they take.
Yeah, I like that
Yeah.
a lot, man. Thank you. That you've kind of furthered my thinking where I've been in the last kind of week or so. So that's terrific. I really appreciate that. And I'm beginning to think how I kind of um gave you a whole ton of labels at the beginning of this in terms of who you are and what you do in the world, which is, quite in logos, and I'd love to hear in your own words about, what it is that you offer, as opposed to my very simple and flat writer,
Right, in the
storyteller.
mythics, yes,
Yeah,
in the visionary sense.
yeah.
Um, it's a really good question. I think at the moment, what I'm offering, and really where my focus is this idea called apotheosis, which is a concept of that there is a road between the spirit and the waking consciousness, or let's make it out of psychology. It's sometimes easier to digest for people. It's the road between the unconscious and the conscious, and that road, in my studies for northern myth, particularly in northern folklore, is that there is often an animal there to guide people through the path between the unconscious and the conscious. And that animal often knows our purpose. It often is often called it's called a fetch sometimes in Ireland, and in Sweden it has many names. And that area at the moment is where I am kind of putting my gaze and my work, and also potentially my second book that I'm about to hopefully get going with, and that's where I am looking and seeing how we can further our understanding of that, so we can have a better relationship with the unconscious, with what moves our innermost desires, what moves our motivations, because it's always subliminal. It comes from the deeper unconscious. We know this, in the way we consume. We know this in the way we have our relationships. So entering that place with a good heart and with a good intention is to try and organize it better. It's a terrible thing to say, but it's true. Organizing our awareness of the spirit world or the unconscious better, allowing our understanding of it to become legitimized again, our dreams to become legitimate, not to be thrown away things. Because I find that our unconscious dreams or visions are often very much in a heap somewhere, lying under, the most hidden away. So they need to be brought out to be made conscious, to be brought into the light. So my work with the animals, is that an animal can hold a story, and it can be a form of the psychopomp between these two states of consciousness, effectively.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't
yeah.
know if that made sense, but that's
It
where I
it
am.
it does make sense, and I'm almost seeing it. It's almost like a connecting conversation because I would call you by another name. You could call that the bridge between the conscious and the unconscious, the imagination, I guess.
Yeah.
And the fact that we kind of need a guide in that space, that all makes a lot of sense to me, man. So
Yes.
thank you for sharing that. I can see why you think that there. Well, I know there's a book in that for sure. Um, yeah. It makes me think of even in nature we see that these places are kind of like the ecotone, aren't they? They're like where the water meets the land, and I know for one, I live here near the beach in the northern rivers of New South Wales in Australia, and when I walk along that particular line, where the water is moving over and drawing back, that's where all the animals are. The crabs and all the things that get revealed in that space, and it's kind of a liminal zone. So I guess you're talking about that
Yeah, that's the
with
fertility, isn't
the
it?
fertility, right? Yeah.
In our interiority, I sense that that's where our the real fertile place is for innovation,
Mm,
inspiration, places where we can change the way in which we see ourselves and the way we interact with the world. I think when as we living, like you rightly say, we live not so much in the in between places anymore. We're very deeply in the rational ego's hold, and we live often as rationalists and scientists in the way we see the world or the phenomenon um, as a society in a whole. And I think what's the results of that has been this incessant sense of sort of despiritualization, or it's become a bit of a wasteland, as T.S. Eliot would say,
mm,
and the wasteland or the emptiness that we gaze towards is something that we receive back as a reflection, and when we see this barrenness, we often reflect it in our own unconscious world. So we become rather empty in ourselves, and I think that's what we're seeing a lot with our mental health issues that are happening and flaring up everywhere. So we're living in a way in a sort of spiritual emergency, and I think where to me, where the important work lies is to try and find that animal again in us that knows the road between the unconscious and the consciousness, and between the consciousness and back to the unconscious. Right? It knows the path in between these places, and that's also with regards to plants and trees and all the living things. They have stories. In Australia, you probably would call these song lines. They have stories that link back to the dream time, or to the dreaming part of themselves. And that's the same with whether it's a flower that grows in the woods, or the trees, or a mountain, or a river. All of them have these divine sources or dreamlike sources. And I've noticed when I look for those sources, when I look for those stories, they're quite easy to find. We just have to go into the folklore, go into the old, particularly the old fairy tales and myths, and there suddenly, there are the flowers on Freya's tiara that opens the gates of spring. Okay, and these are the names of the flowers, and they're often called keys in German, for example. And those flowers are the ones that she uses to open the gates of spring. Suddenly, we have flowers that show us back to the dream time, to the myths. And that's the idea of the apotheosis, is that you have then this road in between these places, and we need to. I'm very curious to develop that further. I mean, one thing that I'm also excited about is that entire schools of Buddhism, right, have been founded on visionary experiences, on things like seeing the other worlds, or the deeper unconscious. Entire schools have been founded on this capacity. So it's something that has extraordinary creative potential.
mm. Uh, Yeah, that's so fascinating. Thank you, Andreas. I really appreciate that articulation, and I'm sensing also, and I'm wondering if you agree that one of the ailments of not being able to dwell in those places is also what we're seeing in our culture about this enormous kind of polarization. Because if we cling to the things, the this or the that, then there's no space in between the things, right? And
That's
so
right.
just become more and more divided, um, which is really everything that we're seeing right now play out. So I think that that's fascinating. I mean, and then even in science, you mentioned in that, it's like we're very fixated on the heartbeat and what that means, but only maybe more recently, it's actually figuring out that the space between the heartbeats is actually very, very interesting.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, yes, I mean, reconciliation between us, between people, it's something that I've been obsessing about for quite some years now, how to create appropriate rituals that can have standing or long-standing reconciliation amongst opposing forces.
Mm,
And it has been done in the world of the gods. They had the most terrible wars in the Eddas between nature spirits and sky gods. And it was so destructive that almost a tree of life started to burn down. The whole cosmos was up in flames. But they managed somehow to get together and create amongst themselves a reconciliation ceremony that was so potent, so powerful, that wisdom was born from it.
mm,
And without reconciliation, whatever church you're part of, whatever temple you pray in, whatever gods you follow, if you do not have peace, if you do not have reconciliation amongst between you and the other, not you and your church members or that's easy, right? That's not that, no, it's between you and the other. And if that's not reconciled, there can be no wisdom in the world, according to the northern myths. So it's very, very important that without reconciliation, we just can't have wisdom. And if that's the case, if wisdom isn't present in the world, it is very difficult then to have this relational experience, whether it's with kin or family or nature. Wisdom is very much integral in that type of education, but it
mm,
cannot come without the price. The peace is the big price for wisdom, and that's something that I find is a beautiful, high, big price, and I'm quite ready to pay it. But to reconcile with the other means that probably you and I will have to sit and bring someone like Donald Trump to the table. Do you know what I mean? Or some areas in our own lives that we really don't like. We have to integrate that, and that's where the hard work begins.
mm. Yeah, that's fascinating. And this idea of reconciliation is actually quite prominent right now in Australia. As you know, there's a lot of work going on, obviously, to with reconciliation around our First Nations people, and it's been such a journey. And I'm thinking just recently we had a rather disappointing vote where people were asked to vote yes or no, and I'm beginning to think, talking about this space in between, that maybe that was the wrong question. It's not a yes or no question, is it?
That's right. It's
Mm,
probably a how question
yeah.
or what question,
Mm,
you know, probably a
mm,
how question.
mm,
I mean, I agree that, without reconciliation with our kin or the other, I realized that with extinction, which is very similar to this, extinction is an enormous psychological drama for people to understand, because it's not about death. Extinction is about the ending of life. It's the ending of birth. Sorry, it's not. It's the ending of birth. It's not about. So it's a really, it's a very hard thing to grapple with, and I knew that for in my life, for me to have a more of a reconciliation with what I've created, what humans have made to the in the animal kingdom, with all the extinctions that are happening on a daily basis, I felt that I had to create a memorial for extinct species. And it was that which is called a life can, which I encourage everyone to create. It's such a beautiful thing, because that provides like a golden thread, and a golden thread to the weight of the world, to the weight of the idea of extinction, but because you are making the memorial, you are also providing. You place yourself in the middle of the cosmos at this point, in the middle of the crisis. But yes, there's grief that will come with that. But after you've created the memorial, there is also a great sense of kinship, a great sense of, this far but no further, right? Something has entered into the bones when you have made this type of memorial, because when grief comes in, which it does when you create this memorial, when you hear about the extinctions, you actually trust your own humanity again, and the people around you. It's having done that, having seen the deep grief that comes through the group, everyone around was like, okay, we trust each other now. This is deeply human to feel this way, and that's something that I think that with any reconciliation ceremony, you need to go through a very strong process of the difficult part, the grieving part, and that's often something we push aside. We leave it unmetabolized. We leave it far away, and if that's not allowed to enter into the ceremony or into the group conversation, then you haven't really scratched the surface yet.
Mm, mm.
And I'm not sure anyone's prepared for that conversation when it comes. Certainly not in America. When it comes to the difficult relationships there with indigenous tribes and all of those things, I feel that that's something for future generations that they're going to have to pick up.
Yeah, I think it's the same here. We kind of speak around it, but to actually speak into it is nigh on impossible at the moment.
I
Mm.
was witnessing a reconciliation ceremony a few years ago. I wanted to translate it. It was between the Samis, the reindeer herders, and the Swedish church.
Oh wow, wow.
It was probably one of the most powerful ceremonies I witnessed. The head of the Swedish church came and really humbly went and had a reconciliation ceremony with the Samis, and it was just so moving to see, because it was real. It
Mm.
the spirit of wisdom started to come into the room, to come into the place, and I think there was great healing done.
Mm.
But the actual reality equally there is that the Samis have to pay tax both in Finland, Norway, and Sweden, because they live as nomads, right? So they cross all three nations. Those who live the traditional lives, and that's it's a kind of catastrophic thing. So there's still a long way to go, but these ceremonies are beginning to catch our imagination,
Mm.
and to work with them is a great privilege. I love doing reconciliation ceremonies. I based mine on the Eddas, which is the reconciliation between the sky gods and nature spirits, and how they managed to find peace, which certainly we haven't managed to find here
Mm.
between between the indigenous and the sun, the earth and heaven and earth. Here is still very much in conflict. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Even from here in Australia, I'm immediately drawn to the Sami storytelling, the Sami mythology is just amazing.
Yeah,
Every
and
time
very
I've heard it,
unknown.
yeah, every time I hear a Sami story, I'm just completely blown away.
Yeah,
So,
it's something that comes from the Finno-Ugric culture, which is, we are so used to the Rig Vedas. I love the Rig Veda. I love the Vedic culture. I'm a great fan of Hinduism, Buddhism, and all of those wonderful wisdom traditions. And that's the one that we're often, Celtic, Norse have the same roots, but Vedic roots, Sanskrit and all of those things. It's the same linguistic tree. But when you have the Finno-Ugric, which comes actually from a line straight through Russia, straight towards Mongolia, straight across into the Scandinavian peninsula, into Finland, and up then into the Arctic, which is a completely different root system than what we're used to.
That's fascinating. I did not know that. That's fascinating. You know, my own ancestry. I'm on my father's side. It's Celtic, and on my mother's side, it's Rush. She's Russian, so it's
Oh
Slavic. So
yeah.
I kind of have a
Oh
little, a
yes,
little,
yes, yes.
little of everything.
That's right. You get both. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's perfect.
So you can say,
Yeah. So
but
Celtic and Norse and all of that, they intermingled,
mm,
they're very similar, and they all have their roots very deeply in the Vedic system, in the Vedic worlds. Yeah. So the Slavic and the Eastern side, it's different images,
mm,
different myths. Star constellations from there is something I'm also researching for my next bit of work. There's a lot of things at the moment to do with. There's a lot of work potential to do with finding new star constellations, new awareness of them,
really,
especially in that field of yes, especially with the Samis, the Norse also. I found at least 12 constellations, and many of them are deer constellations, which is very beautiful. And you've got so you can sometimes see that the constellations are very linked to the forests. Anyhow, but that's again, it's a different mythic roof, whereas what we're used to will be the Greek constellations. It comes from that root, but here with the Slavic and the Finno-Ugric, we're in a whole other world, in a whole
mm,
other mythic roof. Yeah,
mm. I
different mythic roof and different mythic roots.
Right, right. Top and bottom, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I'm called to ask you now if so is the suggestion that runes have a Sanskrit root then coming from the Vedic? Is that what you're
Oh, wow, wow.
intimating?
That's a really fun. Oh, great question.
Yeah.
Runes would be, I mean, the runes that I work with are Proto-Germanic, which is effectively an extinct language way before, say, Old Norse or Old English. And Proto-Germanic, we don't really know how it sounded. I mean, there's speculation, but yeah, those systems, that tree, linguistically speaking, that tree goes back into the Indo-European cultures. Now, in terms of the runes themselves, they have a linguistic value. So they have they are part of, in this case, the ones I use were part of an extinct language, but they also have a symbolic value. And the symbolic value is very different from the linguistic, which is the same for our own alphabet.
Mm.
When we look at the Greek alphabet or the Latin, it also has a linguistic value, but in magical practices of the Mediterranean, it would also have image values, symbolic values.
Boy, they
So those two things,
should be
those
teaching
two
that at
things are
school.
slightly different.
Yeah, I love that you brought that in because I've got a 9-year-old son, and it would be lovely if he had some understanding of the symbolic value of the alphabet.
Exactly. Yeah, and
Mm,
that's the easiest way to do that is just to translate the names of the names of the letters. There's an ox there, there's a house, there's a wagon, there's all the images are there. So that's what I would do for our own alphabets. I, funnily enough, though, I've worked so much with the runic alphabets, many different runic alphabets, that I know how to access their symbolic kind of currents, but not so much my own, not so much the alphabet that I'm speaking now.
yeah, yeah, and I'm wondering about your own children. Are they obviously you're passing on your wisdom in some way? How
Absolutely.
old are they?
They love all that. They've been sort of playing with me in the visionary worlds since they were born in a way. They love
Yeah.
all of that. They're great. They love the musicians, artists, painters, writers. Yeah, so they're fully immersed in it. But they also have. I also feel like you need to have a healthy distance too to the imaginal. I think you need to find a balance between how much, so the distance between again, we're talking about the road of the consciousness to the unconscious. Sometimes you cannot live totally your life in an unconscious realm. You also need to access the consciousness is essential too. And the healthy distance is in the libations. So example, the relationship to the gods or the spirits, I find, is that you have a libation practice. So you keep them, you don't necessarily bring them into the house, right? You keep them at a place where you can go to and have a practice, but you have to also find a balance of how much of this unconscious or spirit world you bring into your daily life.
Mm.
This is why practice is important. Why having a teacher sometimes is important. And
Mm.
when you're young, you can. I don't know if you've had that experience. You can sometimes unground yourself very quickly.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I live in a place called Byron Bay in Australia. Have you been to Australia? You know?
I've
Yeah,
never been to Australia.
yeah.
It's always something I say. I've traveled a lot, but Australia has always been eluding me.
We'll have to work on that, Andreas. I'm sure we can find a
Mm.
way to get you down here. I
Oh
think
yeah,
yeah,
I'd
but
love to come down there to, yeah.
yeah, well, it's quite a spiritual community in every way
Yeah.
in Byron Bay, and you know you often do see children kind of I feel kind of brought into spiritual practices in a way which is maybe inappropriate.
Oh, good point. Yes.
I'm only speaking to exactly what you were saying earlier. In the sense that if I tell a 5-year-old child about their third eye, they're going to take it quite literally.
Yes, and I
Mm,
agree that I think this is why the distance, this is why culturally, I felt that it's good to have a cosmology, basically that you stand in. And then you have practices around that, so the like you say, the literally and the metaphorical, they are able to coexist, and they don't just gobble up one or the other.
mm.
You don't want to be too literalist. You don't want to be too metaphorical. You need that balance.
Oh, I
I
totally
love the
agree.
fact. I love the middle way. Buddha speaks of the middle way, and I think that's the thing to approach. But coming of age ceremonies and teaching certain things at certain times in their lives is also really important. I mean, there are some stories I would not tell my children who are teenagers, for example. There are certain things I would wait until they would be ready to hear certain stories. So yes, this is why it's necessary to have a community, and a culture in which you stand in.
Mm.
Otherwise, it can become very very quickly. You can get thrown into the whirlwinds of the imaginal, and in the worst cases, you can become so caught up in that world that you can't really distinguish from what's real and what's not, and how it the ground of reality slips away. Yeah, that's a difficult thing for young people to manage.
No, I agree. Well, there are many stories that speak to that about the protagonist getting kind of caught up in the maelstrom of the imaginal realm and losing their footing.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah, and you
yeah,
know that's what it means. It's madness, right?
yeah,
That can show up for something like that.
yeah.
It's when images are incoherent, and this is why the animal that's there since your birth, which is the totemic power that we have inside, that totemic power is the force that has the knowledge of your purpose, of why you're moving between these two realms of unconscious and consciousness. And the feeling I sometimes get with this is that if your intention is clear when you are younger, what you want to do, or where you want to go, and who you want to become, you are much more protected from the sort of ravages of the sometimes the unconscious. So it's really good to give often young people that they gain a sense of purpose and meaning to their lives.
Mm,
That's, to me, the meaning of creating meaning for younger people means you're casting a circle around them of protection.
mm,
when their lives have few mean, when it's just entertainment, when it's just Netflix and entertainment and sort of that whole thing, the meaning starts to subside, and that's when the madness can creep in, or the difficulty can creep in. Yeah. So a sense of purpose and meaning is what the totemic energies can bring.
Mm. Yeah, that makes
Totemic is
sense.
what I'm using very much here as a universal word.
Yeah.
There's many different words in Old Norse for it, but I think everyone who listens understands what the totem is.
Mm.
The
I
totemic animal.
you spoke to sort of Netflix and those types of things as well. I feel social media has a large role to play in this kind of fragmentation. I feel like, you know, as a storyteller, um,
Mm.
posts and little kind of reels and things, they're kind of these tiny broken shards of stories, you know? And I think when we just scroll through these, you know, infinite number of little tiny shards of different stories, I think that's one way to get caught up in the maelstrom and lose our footing and go mad, you know.
Mm.
And I think that's the way our young people are kind of consuming stories at the moment. It's kind of like just a broken mirror on the ground, and they're just picking up shard after shard, and nothing makes sense.
And more fragmentation, constant, more pieces, more pieces, more
Yeah,
pieces.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, this is an incessant consumer attitude. I developed a magic. I've developed a magical system. Believe it or not, I'm still in the throes of it. And this is how to. And this is rune magic at its fullest expression. That when you are in the throes of TikTok, when you're in the throes of Instagram and Facebook, you are in the throes of the effectively their you can call them for lack of better word, the logos of those companies, the Facebook F or the TikTok shape. It's these abstract shapes are subliminal shapes that enter into our unconscious, and they're in there they start to design us as consumers in their space. So this very deeply manipulative. What you're talking about there is a deeply manipulative, intentional, magical practice that they push onto young people. They're not necessarily aware it's magical, but what I'm saying it's magical is because they are subliminal practices. They go into the unconscious of the young person. That's where you work when you give rise to addictions, right? Addiction is when the unconscious is set in motion and starts demanding things from you. You're like, I need to do this 5 times a day. I need to do this 10 times a day. And so what I've done is I've constructed an anti-logo, which is called the Demblem, which is a form of a runic shape that is also sent into the unconscious. But it's sent in to say to TikTok, you can go this far, but you can't go further. You cannot drive me into addiction. And that Demblem, that runic shape, is chanted and sent into the unconscious as a way of shielding the influences of the logos of consumer society, which is then the logos that bring addictions, destructive behavior, and all of those things. So marketing, logo creation, branding, all of those things are deeply magical medieval practices. And at the moment, they are used for us to become consumers. That's it. It's a very low grade form of magic, actually.
Mm.
So, funnily enough, we know that there are countermeasures to them. And in rune magic, it would just mean you would sigilize another shape and bring that in and say, look, this far but no further. And I have used it. I've created one emblem at the moment, which is a rather strong one against TikTok in particular. but not against TikTok as the totality of TikTok. Some of it is might be necessary, but against the destructive patterns of it.
Mm.
So for someone who is using it, say 12 hours a day or something, or is getting caught up in that fragmentation, that's when that the emblem then is put into play.
So when you say put into play, Andreas, I'm just fascinated in practical terms. Is that like
Yeah.
something I would have visible near my computer screen or near my phone, or is it a practice that I
Yeah, so you
do?
would have to exactly. You would have to do you would have to create a some kind of choreographed practice, a
Right.
ritualistic practice, where you would receive the emblem, and it will be first of all, it needs to be something you're comfortable with, and it has to. There's all sorts of ritualistic protocols, and then once it's sung and once it's sent, it's then you can forget about it.
Ah,
You can forget about the emblem. It's doing its own thing.
so this is not an
But
ongoing practice.
no, you can then forget about it, and then after a few months, you might open up and say, "Oh, how has my how many Nike shoes have I bought in the past 2 months?" If the emblem is say against Nike shoes for whatever reason, right? Or any other logo. Well, let's say TikTok, for example. How much screen time have I had on TikTok in the last 2 months? And if that's starting to go down, then you know the emblem is working, and you just leave it to do its job. Often with that kind of practice, you are effectively doing you are using the same roots in as marketing people, as brands. It's you're using that same road, but you're putting something there which just protects from the destructive patterns. So it's
Mm.
still a subliminal thing that happens. That's why you're not aware of it in your conscious mind. It goes deeper. And the textless forms like logos are why they're so powerful is because they go so far into our unconscious minds. And children, like from the, I think it's called the Wright Institute, children are exposed to, 400 logos by the time they're, 6, 7 years old. They're not aware of it, but they're instantly exposed to these powers. When you go through an airport, for example, you might be exposed to 40 logos, and you might not notice it whilst you drink your coffee and everything, but your unconscious mind certainly does, and it actually drives your consumerism. You're suddenly you come home with all kinds of things. You're not sure what what's going on here. So yeah, so this is it's the same. It's effectively it's working on that deeper part of ourselves in order to change our consumer behavior and destructive patterns, and it's using ancient runic magic effectively.
Mm. Well, I'm thinking, it works in one direction, like from the companies in, we know that we can see
Exactly.
that. So my
Why
question is
not?
why
That's
wouldn't it
exact.
work the
That's
other
that.
way? Yeah,
Why not? Exactly.
yeah.
And they've used it for so long.
Mm,
But of course, you also get it in the big symbols. You get the same in the bigger symbols. So here we're talking about consumer behavior in our capitalistic society, right? TikTok, etc. But this also works. It's also deeply influential in the bigger symbolic worlds, the religious worlds,
mm.
and all the rest, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of the
That that
the crucifix in the West is the
Well,
obvious
the
one there.
crucifix is the vertical,
Mm,
aspect of heaven, and then the
yeah.
horizontal is the horizontal aspect of the earth.
Uh,
And when they come together in harmony, it's one of our most ancient, powerful symbols that we have.
mm. Yeah,
The
that's right.
cross.
Yeah. Wow, that is super interesting, man. I appreciate everything you've just said there. You got my mind working. I'm
Well, teaching you how to do an emblem, I can send you some hints of how that's done. It's quite a process.
yeah, I can imagine. Look, I read a lot of your work around runes, so I'm kind of I'm fascinated to just hear you speak to them. I think it's amazing. Another thing that well, there's two things that have kind of been on my mind, having kind of read what's going on with you lately, and I'm really enjoying your writing around the high chair ritual.
Oh yes.
Yeah, which is I find fascinating. And obviously, just from this conversation, I can tell that you're kind of very invested in this kind of ceremonial world.
Mm.
And you've spoken as to why that's so important. But the high chair ritual, is that something um, I, I hate to use the word new, but I think you know what I mean.
Mm. It's a deeply traditional way of doing what's called Seidr, Seidr. It's for lack of better word. I know I'll get a lot of pushback on this, but it's the word of shamanism. You know,
Mm.
there's always a conversation around that, but it's when often women called the Velvas, they were staff carriers. That's what Velva means, staff carrier, and they're the ancient witches, very, very much. What we see as the sort of Shakespearean witches, you know, with the over the cauldron and all of that, those are Velvas. They're the original witches, and women of the herbs and the plants, and they were often very knowledgeable about brewing. That's why you see them often on over cauldrons, because they brewed beer, they brewed all sorts of mead. But what they also had is they had a fantastic visionary powers, and often they were put on high seats. And when they were put on high seats, they could see very far into the horizon, but they were also visible to the spirits and to the ancestors. And they would then, once or twice a year, they would sit up on the high seat and they would speak in oracular language to the people gathered. They would go into visionary trance states and they will speak from the different worlds, from the different dimensions. They will speak directly to the farmstead. And this is something that we read about in the sagas. We read it about this practice. So I've done it now for about, some years. I've done at least a couple of high seat ceremonies per year. I'm doing one on Saturday, which I'm preparing for. And it's an absolutely extraordinary ceremony to be involved in, because you get to really feel that ancient oracular power that older women carry. It's something that often it's a woman who's gone through menopause that sits on the high seat, and they have it. The idea is that women have this visionary power innately. They're kind of it's something they simply possess, particularly when they become hollow bones. So they just become mediums in which this oracular language can flow, and that's when you gather in the high seat, you ask the woman, the one who sits on the platform. You say, what should I do about this? Or you ask questions, and the response often is, the hawthorn is on the mountain. you know the swan is swimming across the lake. You get these oracular images back, and that's as she is speaking then in a trance.
Mm.
And this is probably, I would say, the central ritual in heathen custom, the heathen culture of northern Scandinavia or northern Europe.
Wow. And so you have a group of older women that you work
I
with? Is
do,
you
I
wow.
do. Yeah, I work with one. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sheila, her name is, fantastic visionary. There's others as well. It's something I cannot really just reach out for myself. It's something that has to kind of come to me. This is something that it's a bit like, when your antennas are long, you register somehow you meet them,
Mm.
and when it's time, or they know when it's time to do this type of project,
Mm.
this ritual. I've worked with another one called Lynn, another woman who also was very remarkable. All of them absolutely fantastic.
Mm.
And the reason why you use women who've passed menopause in this way is because it's often called the period of the black moon. And that is when they are fully initiated and they are able to carry paradox. So it means that they can carry paradox in both hands. They are capable of grounding themselves in the practice. As they fly into the worlds, they're also able to remain steady on the earth.
Mm.
Whenever younger men or younger women have approached the platform, which sometimes happens, that's when you get the potential too much spirit flight.
Mm.
It becomes too ecstatic very too quickly.
Well, we
And the
circled all the way
trance.
back, Andreas. We've circled all the way back to your book. You know, obviously these women you understand how to walk that road.
Yeah, that's right. They have it. I always feel they have it innately. Men sometimes do sit as well.
Mm.
I'm the one who acts out. I mean, high seat can be theatrical,
Mm.
right? It can be also a bit of theater in a way that she enters the room, she's dressed up, she's got a staff. You know, there's a bit of that going on. Some of them can also be minimalist. It depends on the season often and the spirit of things. But I'm there to facilitate and to make sure that the ceremony has a beginning and a middle and an end,
Mm. Mm.
and that we close the door. So once all of these oracular languages come into the room, once the ancestors are dancing with us, once the songs have been sung, fires have been lit, mead drunk, all of those wonderful things, I'm there to make sure that the door is locked whilst when the ceremony is ended.
Mm.
So
Mm.
I have a protocol in which to open and to close this.
Mm. And are you making the mead and building the platforms and doing
Making
all
the
these
mead,
things?
exactly right. Making the mead, building the platform, carving the staffs,
Wow,
all of the
wow.
things that, yeah, all of the things that allows this to, and it can be a small but robust group. Once I've done one with 200 people, that was incredible. But it's people who participate, they feel immensely grateful to have just touched something so ancestral. And and when you sing the ancestral songs, that's what you do in the beginning. They're called vårdlockor, which is you bring in the memories of the ancestors. So you call out the memory of your grandparents and what they loved to do and how they lived their lives, and you can shout out into the air, and this you ceremonialize that as well. And that it brings it brings them so close. It brings that yeah, and it's cultural, which is wonderful. So it's been in the heathen circles for a while, but I'm glad to say that it's having a small revival, at least here at the moment.
Well, thank you for your part in making that so. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And there's another thing, Andreas, because I feel we're
yeah.
sort of moving towards a closure here. But
Mm.
the other part that I've been curious about with you is how would I call it? You're kind of looking for dragon smoke at the moment, you know.
Oh yeah.
And you know, I'm borrowing a Robert Bly phrase there,
Mm.
which I believe
Mm.
he took from the poetic tradition in China. But you know, this idea of kind of tracking the dragons. And I'd love you to kind of speak about that work.
Yeah, so the dragon trails, my interest in dragons are alchemical,
Mm,
actually. It's interesting. I find the dragon is an alchemical motif, which is a combination of the serpent and the eagle. And the serpent is the animal that leads us and knows the deep chthonic realms. It's the one animal we don't really want to get too close to, right? Because inside of us, the serpent is that which sometimes has to take us down into the underworld properly, you know. And but that's when you slip skin and do all of this work. It's the serpent's work, and then you have the eagle's work, which is all the things we love. High seat can be both, but rituals sometimes singing and being, that's eagle flight. It's spirit. Serpent is the soul. Spirit is the eagle. And alchemically, the alchemists in medieval times or thinkers realized that the dragon is the combination of the serpent and the eagle. So it shapes an integral part of our psychology. And I think dragons have been often understood as creatures that can stand in hell but also fly into heaven, which means that they are in both realms. They have and to get dragon scales and wings is to walk these two paths of the underworld and the upper world. Now, in the landscapes, I've noticed that there are lots of dragons, especially here in England, sleeping under mountains, living by rivers, and all of those. So at the moment, I'm following I'm following these dragon trails and I'm looking at the stories of the dragons in the landscape, and I'm trying to get as much, again, the apotheosis, as much dream time from these stories as I can research and spend time in those parts of the landscape, sit with it and see what rises up. But really, the landscape I find when it's with fused with dragon energy is that it has integration of the two realms, both the underworld and the upper world.
Mm.
I hope that makes sense.
Oh, it does. And in reading your kind of trails, it's fascinating to me the stories that you're telling of place, as you arrive at these places, and then it's connected to the name of a pub or the name of a church, or it's all everything starts to all the pieces of the village or the area starts to come together. It's really beautiful.
I love it. I love when the pieces, when the crystal crown that's been smashed, when you can start rebuilding something from it.
Yeah.
And now dragons are in particularly ancient elemental forces, and there's so much to uncover. It's a whole other podcast on dragons.
Yeah.
In fact, I might do one. I've been asked to potentially do something around this, but there's a lot in terms of the folklore around dragons but that's 10,000 years of hours, you know.
Well, you have your book, I guess, which is, I guess, somewhat connected, Waking the Dragon.
Yeah, waking the dragons is this idea of waking that dragon in yourself, which is capable of seeing its own shadow and integrating that and becoming a fully human. So you don't you are not you are able to find dragon wisdom. So you are reconciling the serpent and the eagle inside of you. The trouble is the serpent and the eagle on the outside are always at war with each other. The eagle and the I'm sure in Australia it's the same thing, right? They're not friends in the bush, right? And here inside they have this similar opposition. So the work of reconciling them is hard. It's a very
Mm,
hard work,
mm.
but it can be done. And I have a system in place, or an ideas in place of how the runes can help us to reconcile these two forces.
Mm.
So that's part of my book, Waking the Dragons, which means waking that potential of psychological integration.
That's fascinating. I'm thinking of Jung now, because he famously said, something along the lines of talking about how hard shadow work was, that it's very hard to see the serpent that's consumed you.
Yeah,
And I feel like that's true in our culture, right?
yeah. I mean, look
Mm,
at alcohol. Alcohol is the biggest shadow in our society. Huge
mm,
shadow, right? And
mm.
and if you start hiding bottles in the house,
Yeah,
um, if anyone listening is hiding the whiskey in the house or the bottles in the house, then you know you're in the grip of the shadow
yeah.
when it comes to alcohol. But when you bring it out to the table and you're putting it there for everyone to see, and if you have problems with it, at least everyone can see it. Then you're not in the grip of the shadow because you can do something about it. You have
Mm.
the capacity to negotiate something with the problem if it's become a problem. But once you start hiding the shadow, that's when the shadow really controls the game.
Well,
It
that's when
becomes
it's consumed you. I would say that's when it's
yeah,
consumed you.
that's right.
So you can no longer see it, because you're
You can no longer see it. In the
yeah.
political sphere, its shadow is having a feast.
Mm, mm, yeah.
Nothing. The serpent loves nothing more. The shadow loves nothing more than someone who is absolutely certain they're right.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
the biggest shadow. Now, the old gods, and I would say this, it's a good way of ending this in a way, but the old gods have not cast in the Norse tradition, they haven't thrown away their shadow. And in a funny way, it's something that at first instance it's a bit, it's difficult to see it because they have all the flaws and troubles and anger and all sorts of things. But they've kept their shadow intact, for us to see.
Mm.
And the trouble with sometimes religions in all cultures, is that they take their shadow and they cast it away. I think Jung and Hillman have spoken greatly on this. They cast a shadow onto some other group of people. No, you carry the snake, you carry our shadow, we don't want it.
Mm.
And they become, whether it's a political party or whatever it is, they become the shadow rather than they themselves.
Yeah.
And again,
Or
that's when
yeah, or they lock it up in the basement like Bluebeard. Mm.
you lock it up in the basement. I mean,
Mm.
exactly right. And
Mm.
that's the so the work of to awaken to dragon wisdom is to actually do the work of dragging that shadow into into the light,
Mm.
and to at least to be able to negotiate with it.
Mm. Mm.
And there's a story there's many stories in the Eddas and the Prose Edda that directly point towards that work, points towards how to integrate the shadow. And
Mm.
Odin, the Allfather, he's great because he shows us in his own, what he makes in his stories, what he does in the stories, he's showing us how to work with our own greed. If he's greedy in the stories, he's giving us an example of how we have to watch out for our own greed, or etc. So you got a lot of, in the myth world, you have plenty of examples of how
Yeah.
that can be
Yeah.
worked.
And that's yeah, no, there's a lot I could say about that, but maybe we'll hold that for next time. But
Yeah.
we talked, Andreas. You talked about dragging it into the light, and then the one thing that I'd like to kind of maybe end on, because I thought it was particularly beautiful, was the piece you wrote on connecting dragons with the rainbow.
Yeah, so when I, gosh, yeah, when I researched the origins of dragons, I came to there's this wonderful mythologist that everyone should read. His name is Sean Kane.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he has this definition of myth that I learned from the School of Myth down in Devon, Martin School, was that the myth is the power of the land speaking, right? It has no author. It's the dreaming landscape. So I asked the question of where that exists, where the dragon exists in that context. And what I found doing the research with reading anthropology is that from the very beginning, we see that it's these old ideas of gold the gold existing at the end of the rainbow. And you find that in rivers a lot around the world, you find that gold indeed come downstream, and rainbows are born from watersheds. So this whole saying of gold being found at the end of the rainbow is a way of knowing where the water is, where the river runs downstream. And then you have the same aspect to this in the fairy tales, where the dragon sits on the pot of gold. And I linked the two, and I found, it doesn't take me long to find out that the rainbow was one of the oldest depiction of dragons as a kind of alter ego of the water. So it's something that sort of comes out of the water to bring rain, or to cause rain, or to cause drought. Sometimes it can also cause drought. And that's when I came to understand that one of our earliest encounters with dragons is that they were rainbows from the very
Mm.
beginning, and you see that deeply in Australia, of course, with the rainbow serpent. And the other thing that's fantastic is when you stand up from above a vantage point looking down, the rainbow is actually a body that moves. It's not an arc that's two dimensional. So if you stand up on a hill looking down and you're lucky to see a rainbow, then you will see its body being very serpent-like, moving across the landscape.
Well, that, my friend, is a beautiful image. So I think we can leave that in people's hearts. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you, man. Look, I've really appreciated this conversation. I know we could talk more, but I think we'll call this part one. And I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Look forward to next time.
Mm.